I'm Chloe, an architect. I had planned every little detail of my wedding, from the flowers to the songs. I always dreamed of this day being like a scene from a romance book where love wins. Jack, my fiancé, was standing at the altar with a nervous smile. He's an engineer, very logical, unlike me, who is more creative. I thought we balanced each other out well. I was so happy to start this new part of life with him. But when our eyes met, I noticed he seemed distant, almost troubled. I thought it was just nerves. I was wrong. As I walked towards Jack, his mom Linda whispered something to her neighbor, sizing me up with narrowed eyes. When she saw me looking, she forced a smile and said I looked beautiful, but it didn't seem genuine. The ceremony went on, and when the pastor asked if Jack would take me as his wife, there was a long, painful pause before he finally said, "I do." But his eyes didn't have the warm feeling I'd always associated with those words. As we exchanged rings, Linda stood up and took a photo, loudly saying we needed to capture the moment because weddings are just the beginning of a lifelong commitment. The irony wasn't lost on me. It felt more like a warning than a blessing. During the reception, Linda came over to me while I was talking to some old college friends. "Oh, Chloe," she said in a sweet tone, "your dress is lovely, though a bit unconventional for a wedding. But then again, you've always been rebellious, haven't you?" I looked at her, forcing a smile. "Well, I believe weddings are about celebrating love, so why stick to tradition?" I tried to keep things light. Before Linda could reply, Jack stepped in, telling his mom to leave me alone because it's our day. I felt a momentary relief, thinking he was finally supporting me. But then he added, "Besides, there's no point arguing about dresses and traditions now, is there?" His words carried a sense of resignation that shouldn't have been there on what was supposed to be our happiest day. I looked around the room, hoping to find someone who could reassure me that everything was normal, that it was just wedding stress making everyone act strange. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The warning signs were too obvious to ignore. As we prepared for our first dance, Jack held me at arm's length. Our bodies moved to the music, but it felt like our souls were miles apart. The song, meant to be a celebration of our love, seemed to mock me instead. "So, Mrs. Chloe, ready for forever?" Jack asked as the music faded away, his words echoing in the space between us. If forever was going to be like today, I thought, then I didn't know. But all I said was, "Yes, ready as I'll ever be," praying that the dark cloud hanging over us would lift and that this bizarre start would just be a blip in our forever. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a saga that would test not just our marriage, but the very essence of who I was seemed to be under attack. As everyone raised their glasses to toast our new beginning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had already ended. After the wedding, we returned to my cozy 3-bedroom house, bought with years of hard work. It was meant to be our safe haven, a fresh start for a lifetime together. Little did I know, those walls would soon feel like a prison, a stage for domestic battles. The invasion started subtly. Linda, who lived just 15 minutes away, began dropping by uninvited. She never missed a chance to criticize me, my cooking, the arrangement of the living room, even the color of the bathroom tiles. "Why can't you make anything other than this tasteless pasta?" she scoffed during one visit. Jack would weakly intervene, but it felt like he did it more for show than genuine concern. Linda's visits became more frequent, almost like clockwork, each one marking her territory with a snide comment. But the biggest shock came when she arrived one afternoon with suitcases and an air of entitlement that could suffocate anyone within a mile radius. "I'll be living with you now," she declared, pushing past me to claim my cozy reading nook as her own. My heart sank. I looked at Jack, silently pleading for him to say something to stop this. This was our home, our decisions to make together. "Jack, can I talk to you for a moment?" I managed to pull him aside, my voice trembling. "We should have discussed this before any decision was made." He looked at me, his eyes void of the love and support I desperately craved. "I thought I had seen just a few months ago. Mom's getting older, Chloe. She shouldn't be alone. She should be with family," he said, emphasizing the word family as if I weren't considered part of it. So I'm not family? Is that what you're saying? I questioned, feeling the hot sting of tears starting to form. You know that's not what I mean, he retorted, clearly exasperated. But Mom has done a lot for me, and I owe her this much. What about what we owe each other? We just got married, Jack. This is supposed to be our time to grow as a couple, not play house with your mom. But my arguments fell on deaf ears. The decision was made just like that. My opinion, my feelings, my home, none of it seemed to matter. And so Linda moved in, turning the love nest I had envisioned into a battlefield of egos, tensions, and outright hostility. Every room in the house felt heavier, suffocated by her presence. I could no longer find a quiet corner to read, a peaceful moment to reflect, or even a loving glance from the man I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. That's how I realized I wasn't just fighting for my marriage or my home. I was fighting for my identity, my dignity, and my peace of mind. All the while, a single thought echoed through my head. How did it come to this? How did my life, my home, my choices become secondary to the whims of someone else? My reading nook was now a shrine to Linda's possessions, my kitchen a stage for her criticisms, and my husband, well, he was a stranger siding with the enemy, and all of this was just the beginning. If I thought life was hard before, it was nothing compared to the living nightmare that followed. The atmosphere in the house grew denser each day, as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. What made it even worse was the undeniable 2 blue lines on the pregnancy test I held in my trembling hands. I had always imagined sharing the news of my first pregnancy as a moment of joy, an occasion to be cherished. But as I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, eyes red from restrained tears, I realized this milestone had turned into a millstone around my neck. When I told Jack about the pregnancy, his response was as lackluster as ever. Well, that's something, he mumbled before quickly changing the topic to discuss a home improvement project his mother had suggested. It was Linda, of course, who took control of my pregnancy as though it were her divine mission. She began dictating my diet, my activities, and even the hospital where I would deliver. But her intrusion didn't stop at unsolicited advice. She managed to turn my pregnancy into another battleground for her psychological warfare. "You're eating again," she would say, her eyes darting towards the modest sandwich I'd made for myself. "Shouldn't you be careful about gaining weight during pregnancy? This is doctor recommended." "Linda," I'd reply, mustering all the patience I had left, "doctors these days know what they're talking about." Back in my time, we knew how to handle pregnancies, and so it continued. As the weeks went by, my energy waned, but Linda's expectations soared. She turned my home into her personal palace, ordering me to clean, cook, and cater to her needs as if I were a servant rather than a daughter-in-law, and a pregnant one at that. "Chloe, why haven't you vacuumed the living room yet?" She'd yell from her self-assigned throne, my old reading nook where she'd spend hours scrolling through her phone or watching daytime TV. "I've been feeling really tired today, Linda. The doctor advised me to take it easy," I'd say, my voice tinged with desperation. "Tired? Pregnancy isn't an illness, you know." Jack once again remained conspicuously silent, his compliance deafening. The tension reached a breaking point during another heated dinner discussion, where Linda decided to critique my choice of baby names. "That's a ridiculous name for a child. You might as well pin a 'Kick Me' sign on his back for his entire school life," Linda sneered. "Enough is enough, Linda. This is my child, and I have a say in how to raise him or her," I snapped, my patience finally depleted. "Oh, so now you're talking back to me?" Linda's eyes flared, her voice escalating. Jack intervened, but not in the way I had hoped. "Chloe, you're being emotional. Mom's just giving her opinion," he said. I looked at him, then at Linda, and then at the house that had turned into a nightmare. I felt trapped, humiliated, and utterly alone. I could barely recognize the woman staring back at me in the reflection of my tarnished wedding ring, a woman who was slowly losing everything she had once valued: her home, her dignity, and most devastatingly, her will to fight. And that's when it happened. The ultimate betrayal. Linda, filled with venomous triumph, looked me dead in the eyes and said, "If you can't handle a simple family discussion, maybe you shouldn't be a part of this family." And Jack, he said nothing. His silence spoke volumes, cutting deeper than any words ever could. It was in that moment I realized that my nightmare wasn't unfolding. It had already unfolded, and I was living in it. My life had become an unrecognizable maze of shattered hopes and suppressed sobs. I moved like a zombie through the rooms that no longer felt like my home. The baby inside me seemed to be the only living part of my existence, and I clung to that tiny spark of life as my last shred of hope. But even that was threatened. One cold evening marked my breaking point. We were having another one of those god-awful family dinners, where tension cut through the air like a knife. I had spent hours on my feet cooking a meal that I knew Linda would find fault with, no matter how perfect it was. Each critique was a jab, each scoff a slap. I knew another one was coming, and I braced myself for it. But when it finally came, it was worse than anything she'd said before. "You really think you're fit to be a mother if you can't even manage a household? What are you going to do with a baby?" Linda sneered. My heart sank into my stomach, each word a stab at my already fragile self-esteem. Before I could say anything, Jack joined in, sealing my emotional fate. "Mom has a point, Chloe. You need to step it up. We're going to be parents soon." That was it, the final straw. A bolt of anger mixed with a lifetime's worth of resentment and humiliation surged through me. "Step it up? Step it up?" I shouted, surprising even myself with the intensity of my voice. "I am carrying our child for months, managing our house, and putting up with relentless emotional abuse from your mother, and you tell me to step it up." Both Jack and Linda looked stunned, but I was on a roll, a volcano finally erupting after years of suppression. "I'm done. I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice cracking. "I won't raise my child in an environment where their mother is treated like dirt. If you two are what family means, then I don't want any part of it." And with that, I left the table, leaving them both in speechless disbelief. I packed a small bag and headed for the door, my trembling hands struggling to turn the doorknob. That's when Linda decided to deliver her ultimate blow. "Where do you think you're going? This is Jack's house, not yours." I turned around, my eyes locking onto hers. "Actually, Linda, this is my house. I bought it, and I have every right to say who stays and who leaves." "Chloe, don't do this. Let's talk about it," Jack pleaded, finally realizing the gravity of what was happening. "There's nothing left to talk about," I said, tears streaming down my face. With that, I stepped out into the frigid night air. No coat, no plan, just an overwhelming urge to escape. As the door shut behind me, it felt like a closing chapter, the final act of a tragedy that had stretched on for too long. I began to walk, each step a painful reminder of the life I was leaving behind. I had no idea where I was going, but it didn't matter. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of my destiny. But the cost of my newfound freedom was agonizingly high. The icy wind pierced through my thin clothes as I trudged along the deserted streets. I had walked for what felt like miles, lost in a haze of emotional and physical exhaustion. I was almost there, almost at my parents' house, a sanctuary from the hell my life had become, when my foot caught on an uneven slab of pavement. I stumbled, twisting my ankle painfully as I fell to the ground. The pain was sharp, but it couldn't match the ache in my heart. Limping and teary-eyed, I finally made it to my parents' doorstep. The look of horror on their faces as they opened the door told me everything I needed to know. My breaking point had come, a long overdue fracture in a life burdened with far too many cracks. And as they rushed me to the hospital, I knew something had to change. I couldn't go back, not to the house, not to Jack, and certainly not to the woman I had become. Hospital rooms have a peculiar way of forcing reality upon you. As I lay there, my sprained ankle elevated, and my body checked for any complications due to my fall, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. My parents were there, their faces etched with concern and quiet fury over what had transpired. They'd always suspected that my marriage was far from ideal, but the depths of its dysfunction had finally been laid bare. Close, sweetheart. What are you going to do now? My mom finally broke the silence, her voice heavy with worry. I don't know, Mom. But what I do know is that I can't go back to that life. Not now, not ever, I replied, my own voice firmer than I expected. My dad, who had been pacing the room, finally spoke. Your mother and I will support whatever decision you make, but you need to think about your future and the future of your child. I nodded. I had been doing nothing but thinking, my mind a labyrinth of potential scenarios, each one fraught with uncertainty but also tinged with the promise of freedom. It was then that my phone buzzed. A text from Jack. Chloe, where are you? We need to talk. Ignoring the text, I switched off my phone. Whatever he had to say, it was too little, too late. I was done talking. My actions would speak louder than his words ever could. My first move was a call to a family lawyer, a decisive step in putting an end to my disastrous marriage. With my parents by my side, we discussed divorce proceedings, child custody, and alimony. There was something chillingly clinical about dissecting a failed relationship in legal terms, but it also instilled in me a sense of empowerment. For the first time, I was taking control of my life, making choices that prioritized my well-being and that of my unborn child. A week later, Jack and Linda were served divorce papers and a notice of eviction from the house, my house. The lawyer also included a clause for hefty child support payments and financial compensation for the emotional distress I had endured. It felt drastic, but it was necessary. It was my first step towards reclaiming my life. The darkness had consumed me, and towards a future that, while uncertain, held the promise of something better. The courtroom had that sterile, cold air that seems exclusive to places where lives can change in an instant. My lawyer sat next to me, a stack of papers in front of her, radiating confidence. My parents were behind me, their moral support palpable across the room. Jack sat with a look of defeated bewilderment, his mother Linda beside him, her face a mask of indignant disbelief. All rise, the bailiff announced, and Judge Morrison entered the room. The divorce proceeding was a whirlwind of legalese, a barrage of facts and accusations laid bare for the court to dissect. As the evidence of Linda's abusive behavior and Jack's neglect was presented, I watched their faces contort, perhaps truly seeing themselves for the first time through the eyes of the law and through my eyes. The judge turned to Linda. Mrs. Davis, you stand accused of emotional abuse and harassment. The evidence is overwhelming. How do you plead? Your Honor, this is all taken out of context. I was only looking out for my son's well-being, Linda stammered, her voice lacking its usual arrogance. It appears your definition of well-being is quite twisted. Judge Morrison retorted, clearly unimpressed. Finally, the judge rendered her verdict. The court hereby grants Chloe Davis a full divorce from Jack Davis. Custody of the unborn child will be given to Chloe. Jack Davis, you are required to pay child support as determined by the state. And Mrs. Linda Davis, considering the extensive evidence of your emotional abuse and harassment, I'm fining you $100,000 for your actions. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as the gavel came down, but it was a bittersweet relief. My marriage had ended not with a bang, but with a quiet rustling of legal papers. I was free, but at a cost I never could have imagined when I said, I do. As we left the courtroom, Jack approached me, a lost look in his eyes. Chloe, I'm so sorry. I never thought we'd end up here. I stared at him, seeing the man I had once thought I would spend my life with, and all I felt was a void where love used to be. I didn't think so either, Jack, but here we are. It's too late for sorry now, I said, turning my back on him and walking away. Linda tried to make eye contact as I passed her, perhaps seeking some form of acknowledgement or forgiveness, but I gave her none. She had taken so much had been taken from me, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing she still mattered. When I stepped out of the courthouse, the sun seemed a little brighter, the world a bit more colorful. It was as if I was seeing everything through new eyes, not clouded by constant anxiety and emotional distress. It was the beginning of a new chapter for me, one written on my own terms. My mother hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes. "You did it, Chloe. You're free, and it's all thanks to you and Dad." "I couldn't have gone through this without your support," I replied, grateful beyond words. "We'll always be here for you," Dad said, joining in the group hug. That night, I sat alone in my house, the house that was now truly mine, and felt a sense of peace settle over me. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. For the first time in years, the only expectations I had to live up to were my own. I was still apprehensive about the challenges that lay ahead. After all, I was going to be a single mother with all the responsibilities that entailed. But as I touched my belly, feeling the gentle stirrings of my unborn child, I knew we would be okay. My painful journey had led me to this reckoning, and while scars remained, they were now a part of a story of survival, not defeat. I was ready for whatever came next, not because I had to be, but because I chose to be. And that made all the difference.